Nice to meet you. We haven't met before, which
No,
is kind of crazy, but
I know. Nice to meet you as well.
nice to finally meet you, at least somewhat face to face. I think I've heard about you over the years. I cooking in New York back, in the day,
Yeah,
we would hear about you, but never really interfaced. We're going to talk about a little bit today because you're finally coming to New York.
that's right.
Um, I think for the audience, I'm not going to like bother with a bunch of background because everybody listening here likely knows you. But dozens of restaurants around the world, multiples of dozens, 3 times Chase Beard Award winner, Michelin stars, 5-star diamond, Wine Spectator. You get it, you know the drill.
Yeah.
Um, I have to ask you, just sort of kicking things off, like how does it feel to open in New York now, finally? Because you started in New York.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. It's really exciting. I mean, honestly, it's been strategic to have taken the time to not open in New York, because, when I raised a family, have two boys, and now they're both,
How old?
well, now they're 22 and 25. And so now they're out of the house and doing their thing. And that was always really kind of that benchmark of saying, when you open in New York, what type of a commitment that is. And I always said, it's not even really a consideration until the kids were all settled and out of the house and really had the time to do it. And I'm, and so I think from that side, I think that was kind of one of the driving factors. And then I always wanted it to be I wanted it to feel right. And this particular opportunity, just, being at the Essex House, being being in Central Park, and it really, it feels like really the right time and the right restaurant concept that I wanted to do there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're all excited. I'm New York based, and we're all excited
Thank you.
to see you. A little tangent just for today, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Actually, the first time I heard about you 2 decades ago, I was cooking for Bouley,
Oh,
and you've had a bunch of chefs, obviously
yeah.
Sarah Rich, who I worked with her husband a lot, and
Yeah.
Raj, who's
Right.
still working with you. Man, I mean, it's crazy. Just personally, Greg Kuntz was my mentor for many
Yeah.
years, and Floyd Cardoz before that, and Bouley before that, and like in the last 3 years, all three of them have passed away. And I don't know if you knew Bouley, but I'd
Yeah.
love to maybe take a minute to just talk about that because
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think that it's, I think it's really sad. I think that, Sammy, can you shut that door? Sorry. I think it's really, something that, like you said, it's been multiple, unfortunately now it's been multiple chefs, and obviously our industry is hard. It's very demanding, it's very intense. And I think that there's no doubt about it that you can, but I think that the camaraderie that happens in this industry, and then the respect you have for people with so much talent and that work so hard. And I think what kind of what hits people really hard is it's also, a lot of people, you're connected with chefs because they're doing something, right? And so if you've eaten at their restaurants or whatever, so a lot of people are connected. I mean, David Bouley is, that's an icon. That's not oh, I had a 3-year run or I had a 5-year run on top. This is a person
yeah,
that,
yeah,
is one of the people that really shaped the industry, right? And, I was working at Tribeca Grill when, he had Montrachet,
hmm
and I mean, just to even be in a room with him was like, oh, and, so it hits hard, and then
yeah,
you see the talent that comes. It's really, I think, Josh, I think it's interesting. I think that, sorry, I won't go on a tangent, but I will a little bit, just because
no,
I think
please,
it's really
yeah,
important, is like, you know, as a chef, not, I never got to work in the kitchen besides doing events together, which was, always great. But as far as like,
hmm
working under David Bouley, I didn't get to have that privilege. But I see a Raj Dixit who I worked with for years, and I just see how he conducts himself, how he thinks about food and everything else. And so many times when I ate uh, Chef Bouley's food, I can see exactly like why Raj cooks like that, why his mind works like
Mm-hmm.
that, and it's it, it, it really shows like how people like that really have shaped our industry and made the U.S. You think about the rise in food in quality of cooking in restaurants in the U.S. Well, those are you know those are the type of people that really started it,
Yeah.
pushing
Yeah.
everyone to a totally different level.
Yeah. Yeah. What I think about, and I've thought about it a lot more last night too. Um, and it hit me each time, right? I spent the least amount of time with Bouley, actually. I think it was only like 8 months.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I told, because I wanted to go work for Kuntz, and I was like dying to, I was
Yeah,
waiting for his new restaurant to open. But the thing that, and you must think about this now. I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years or so, I think.
yeah,
The thing about chefs that is so different, I think, from so many other industries is that you see the impact that they have because there's so many chefs that came from them that when something like this happens, and it's a bummer that this only starts to like be talked about when someone passes away, but
sure,
the impact, the number of chefs that came through,
yeah,
Bouley's kitchen, and I mean, is astounding, and
yeah,
and same with Kuntz and with Floyd, it's astounding, and the same with what with your kitchens, and there's something about being a great chef, independent of making delicious food, where you are able to sort of
yeah.
instill this thing in other chefs that it's somewhat rare.
Well, I think one of the things that I've really kind of linked together of doing this for many years is like looking at like everyone wants to give you these people came from your kitchen or you're their mentor or this or this or this. I'm not a big believer in that in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, I look at it and say, you look at the relationships that they built with other people in the kitchen. You look at how strong and long those relationships are. And that's where the web really, I think, really starts to take shape. Is like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a Raj Dixon. I'm going to learn just as much from Raj as he's going to learn from me. But it's more about like, then you start to say, okay, well, when a Raj stays with you for many years and then he influences 10 people and those 10 people influence 10 people and they all keep a very tight relationship. I don't get upset when somebody says, that they worked for me in Washington, D.C., and I only got to spend, X amount of days in a kitchen with them, as long as they went on to do something great, or built relationships. I think that that's where the web gets really exciting and interesting. And I think that, like, when you talk about a David Bouley or a Greg Coons or that, it, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's kind of like like-minded people attract each other
Mm-hmm.
in a certain
Yeah.
way. And
Yeah.
then that's how, to me, that's how that flower really grows, right? That's how that plant really grows is, yes, you might be the one creating the base foundation for people to get together. But the reality is I think when it's really meaningful and it really, I think it's really uh, valuable to our industry is when they all build their own relationships together and,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all in touch with each other for many, many years to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is setting that stage
100%.
because look, there's lots of restaurants where we interact with some really great people, but there's not nearly as many where there's just so many that go through, and that sort of compounds on itself. And you're right. Like a lot of times, the person I remember most is the sous chef or the
100%.
CDC that I was working under.
Yeah.
But that's also because it's sort of trickling down. Because of the environment that they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally
Um.
agree.
Anyways, uh, something I've been thinking about, just looking at your trajectory of like how much you're building and growing is I'm genuinely curious about this. There's a lot of chefs that have, well, there's not a lot. There's a decent amount of chefs that have won awards. You won a James Beard pretty early on. You won Best New Chef.
Yeah.
A lot of these things, but you could stop there. You could have one two
Mm.
spots and then kind of like do your thing. And you decided to grow this sort of empire.
Mhm.
Why? And what's driving you to keep building this thing?
It's, I mean, I know that it's going to sound cliche and I know that people will say it's the team. It really is in our case. Like it, you know, the first restaurant was Aqua and I was young. And so like the whole group of us kind of did a lot of this together. Like we built this great,
How old were you?
what?
How old were you when you were at Aqua?
24. Um,
Oh my God.
and it, and it blossomed because of a lot of people. And then the second one happened to be Bellagio, right? And so started to, and I had worked at Four Seasons in the past, while we were building Aqua. I'd worked at Four Seasons, and so I kind of understood that model of like why Four Seasons was special. In the sense, I learned that early on, like they were special because of a lot of things, but they didn't take on owning these properties. They managed them, and so their real focus was in operations, was in creativity, was in standards and discipline of the standards and things of that nature, right? And so when I had a chance to build MINA Group, we really got together, a group of us, and like, we said, okay, if we're gonna grow, let's think about the way that we're gonna be able to build the type of restaurants that, one, we already operate, that we're very comfortable with, that we can push the envelope. Two, what's going to keep us excited, and being able to grow and to partner with hotels. And at that time, hotel dining had started to come back, like building, you know, really, high quality restaurants back in hotels was starting to come
Mm-hmm.
back. We saw it. And so building those partnerships and then being able to do different concepts and partner with other chefs and do things of that nature, that was exciting. I felt like we had a really strong team and I mean a team outside of just the restaurant team, like really strong people in whether it was in HR, whether it was in, marketing or whatever, in the disciplines you need to partner with a hotel, to where we could really focus on operations. We could focus on innovation, design,
Mm-hmm.
doing the things you know, that are the part of the job that, I'm sure this as a chef. All of a sudden, you think you think you're a plumber, you think you're an electrician, you think you know how to do everything. The toilet breaks, everyone asks you how to fix it, right? And you realize that like you really aren't great at all that, or maybe you are, but it all takes time, right? So where are you going to put your time? And so that's kind of, I think, what, where the vision started of saying, okay, well, let's build a few restaurants under this, with this vision. And the vision was to do, when I first started MINA Group, the vision was to do 8 restaurants. That was kind of the model. And it was Andre Agassi was my partner. And we set out to do that. And all of a sudden, we just, we kept getting opportunities. And honestly, I had really good talent of young, people that were ready to be chefs and ready to be general managers and ready to be sommeliers or mixologists. And so
Yep.
we just kind of, kept going.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a great way to be able to have upward mobility for the team.
Hmm.
Um, are the majority of your restaurants, and if you can't answer this, fine, but like, are the majority of them management
Yeah.
contracts, or
Yeah.
are there a mix of
Oh
corporate
yeah.
owned? And
Almost all of them. I mean, to this day,
can you tell people why, by the way, can you just maybe tell people why that's such a better model?
well, I think it's a lot of what I was saying. Like it's, I, what I've learned over the years is pick your partners, because you got to put a lot of time and effort into picking the right partners. And so I've been really lucky in the sense that like my first partner, while it was Bellagio was bought by MGM. So I was
Hmm.
partnered with MGM. That's been an amazing experience because we are able to really focus on running a restaurant. And I think that that's the why to me. The why is that, you know, it, you think about like why this business is so stressful, right? Well, a lot of the stress comes from things that actually don't have a lot to do with running your restaurant, right? And so
Hmm.
I think if you can put all your creativity, your energy, and the majority of your stress into running actually running your restaurant and what's going to affect the guests. And you have a partnership where you're not worried about, you're not the one that's doing the initial upfront financing. So you're not running around figuring out how to finance the restaurant. You're not that you have an engineering department, you have an HR department, it's really becomes a great team effort. And, certain thing, I think that this wasn't by accident that this has taken off in the United States and that it's helped the quality of food. This isn't by accident that there's a lot of other chefs or restaurateurs partnering in hotels and doing these type of deals, because there's a win, it's a win-win for both sides, where you're going to you're bringing something to the hotel that really helps the hotel. And as a chef and as a restaurant group or a restaurant, you're able to focus in on what is really going to affect your staff and your guests the most. And I think that,
it's just
to
less things to
me,
deal with.
like, it just, while there might be a more profitable way to do it or whatnot, to me, this is the way that, this is the way I think that, is the best for our group. And so that's like, when we veered off of the track, in all honesty, we've seen, that, there's just not as much enjoyment and pleasure in it.
Yeah. Well, carting and leases are just not normally fun.
No. And, look, we know how to do them because obviously we've had to deal with it, but it's, at this point, it's not what I run out to go figure out, how do I do my next lease? I'd much rather partner. And like I said, I think one of the tricks to it is finding great long-term partners, whether it's the people that own the hotels or whether it's a brand like a MGM or a Four Seasons or a combination of both.
Yep.
When you find the right partnerships, if you can do more with them, that's a really nice way to grow together.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, I have to imagine the things that you're dealing with today are just different from what at least maybe you personally were dealing with 30 years ago. But what's the biggest thing on your plate right now? Like the biggest challenge or stress or hurdle?
I mean, honestly, believe it or not, it actually has stayed fairly consistent over the years, in the sense of, my main goal is always to be able to spend a significant amount of time at an opening and be able to be in the kitchen, be able to be in the restaurant. And so I've had to really prioritize my time. Like, I'm not a chef that you're going to find on television a lot. And it's not because I don't believe in it. It's because it actually is a real talent and it takes real effort.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the first time I did something on television, I was like, wow, like you actually have to prepare for this. You've got to put real time into this if you want to be good at it. And there's only X amount of time. Right. And to me, it's just important to stay in a rhythm. So the biggest thing that I spend my time on right now, in all honesty, is really being in the restaurants and working on the career pathing. And because, like right now, we've put a lot of resources towards learning development and career pathing, because, people are learning in a much different way than they used to, in the sense that, it's hard. It's going to be a lot harder nowadays to have somebody prep for a year, or be in garde manger for a year or anything like that. Right. People want to.
Why do you think that is?
I just think that people want to be able to be rewarded for their knowledge and what they think their knowledge could be. And if they're going to work harder, they want to move up, quicker than they did before. I mean, I'm seeing it all the time. And so, like, you've got to kind of keep up with that. And I'm not saying that's just saying it's the only way. I'm a firm believer there isn't only one way to do anything, right? But if you're doing what we're doing, which you have multiple restaurants, you do have to do that. Maybe if you have one kitchen and, like, your going to be there every day and everything else, and people will still, you're going to have a smaller staff. Yeah. But if you want, to have multiple restaurants, or if you have multiple people and you want to use your strengths, for us to use our strengths to be the best company we can be, and to, be able to build the restaurants we want to build, it is okay, in my opinion, that if people are growing faster, to be able to, we got to put the resources towards being able to help them grow, and also being able to notice they're growing, because like,
Yeah.
anybody who's worked in a kitchen knows how frustrating it is if no one notices that you're growing, or if it's just like, it's this set amount of time you need to be here, even though, you know, you have the capacity to grow faster than that. And so I think that that's something that is important both in front and back of the house, and especially, in front of house now. I mean, you think of the mixology world, and you think of, now obviously the wine world and the som world, that has been, that's been there for a while, but, that knowledge comes at a different pace depending on the person.
Yeah. 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 It's so interesting. Like I'm so curious, like what it is like today, if you had to start cooking today as opposed to 30 years ago.
Very
because
different.
there's so much more information available.
100%.
Like I wouldn't be able to Google like how to make a Ballantine. Like you could probably like learn exactly how to make it on YouTube right now.
100%.
And come in and know how to make it. And like, how do you balance that when you have cooks that actually you see potential and you want them to grow? Be like, hey, you kind of need to make that 50 times to know how to really make it. Like, what do you do about that?
So what we do about it, I don't know what everybody does about it. What we do about it is we lean into it really, really heavy. So like 12 years ago, I think, no, it was more than that. 15 years ago, we started Recipe Exchange. And Recipe Exchange was saying, no, you will never again have to work this long to get this recipe for this soup. From day one, every single thing, we're going to be transparent about everything. Every recipe, every dish, every ingredient to the gram, every technique is going to go up on the site, and it's going to be there. And it all, at that time, I think it was 12 restaurants. And I got to be honest with you, I think like 6 chefs quit right? At the same time.
Really?
We launched it. Yeah, because it was either they didn't want to do the digital work, or they didn't want to share the recipes, right?
Yeah.
And what we took the approach of is, we're going to share every recipe, so everybody has everything from day one, whether you're a server, whether you're a, and that whole fear of like, oh, well, people are going to steal your recipes, whatever. Like you just said, it's all out there now, right? It's all out there.
Yeah.
So why not organize it in a way where it's the most useful for people, so they can learn the fastest, so that, like, to me, the biggest reward now is for people to be able, someone to say to me like, oh my God, I worked here, I worked there. Nobody had anything like this, to where I can go, if a person wants to spend, 8 hours on their own time doing this, they can go do it and learn a lot on our platform. Right. And I think that to me is what you have, that to me was very important for us. And that was actually what COVID helped a lot with, because we got the time to actually, because, when else are you gonna get a time where you got all your chefs?
You can't get it done then,
sit around and do this for 2 years, right? So we were able to get a lot done at that time doing it.
That's cool. From afar, what I interpret from looking at your operation is like you're really systems driven. I mean, that means a lot of fucking things, but if you can't have that many restaurants and not create a bunch of systems so that there's consistency, and consistency is basically everything, right? Like customers don't want to come get a different dish the next time, the same order. How do you, I'm so curious, how do you balance, creating these systems that make sure that you have consistency, like to make sure that like everything is consistently executed the same way every time at scale, but then also balance that with like teaching these cooks like the fundamentals of cooking or techniques or independent thinking, even like do you think about how do you sort of, where do you sort of like toe the line between this is precisely how you make this thing. And by the way, you don't know that, but that's actually a sauce called Espanol or something.
Right.
You know?
Right. So I think that those are, the two questions there. The first one would be if it's honestly a lot easier if you have less restaurants, right? Because like
Hmm.
thinking about the systems when it was one restaurant, that was great because you were able to, you didn't have to think about how do they scale, right? You only had to think about how does it work in this restaurant.
Hmm.
And so I think that it's really important that if you only have one restaurant, you really are the transparency, I think, is something that you have to, in your stomach, have to feel good about. Like, and I think that different chefs feel different ways about it. Like, not everyone feels great about like day one. Somebody might not, they might stay with you for 2 weeks and you just gave them all your recipes, right? That's hard, but there's no way
Yep.
there isn't really a way around it, right? There is, if you want to be productive with it, if you want to use it as a tool, you want to use it. And that kind of goes to your second question of if you give them the information, if you give people the information, if you give Jennifer the information, if you give, anyone the information, right? It's one, they're going to entrust more in you that you really are helping their career. They're going to probably work harder because they have the information. And there's definitely a way to utilize that to teach them those fundamentals that you're talking about quicker than they would have learned them without the information. And that's the way that I've always looked at
Hmm.
it is I don't know how long it's going to take for, for, Daniela to learn A, B, or C, right? But the reality
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what I'm giving her couldn't be hurting it, right? It's not
Yeah.
it
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
hopefully going
Yeah.
to speed it up, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about like, so sometimes you obviously had to be really prescriptive about like the dish that they're going to make.
Yeah.
And, they might read a recipe that has 200 grams of sherry vinegar and 200 grams of maple syrup and, peppercorn and they're making a gastrique, but they actually don't know it's a gastrique and that they could do 50 other things with that premise
Right.
of vinegar and something sweet, something acidic. Like, are there
Yeah.
other ways
Yeah.
independent of like the recipes where you help them
100%.
understand that?
100%. So I think that that's where the real part of the kind of that longevity of having a team that has longevity together because yes, you're cooking. I mean, I kind of call it the 2-2-2-2 rule, right? People, a lot of times the last 2 hours, because like they come in and they're there for their 2 hour stage and they're like, okay, I'm never coming back here, because it's just like there's too much, right? Then it's the first 2 days are really important, right? First 2 days, people are terrified when they go into work. It doesn't matter where, like it's just kind of human nature. It's just, the first 2 days are intense. Then the
Hmm.
first 2 weeks, you start talking yourself into, what you think, did I make the right decision or not? Right.
Yeah.
And then the first 2 months, you've now talked yourself into it. The first 2 months are a lot of it is learning, like where do the pots, where do I drop the pots and pans? Where do I do this? Where do I do that? And you're just trying to get through the day. And then after the first 2 months, when you get there, the goal is to get them through 2 years. Cause kind of after a couple of years, now they're part of they're part of your team. They really are part of your team. And it might be that they go on at that point, but that's kind of, that point where I see like as it starts to become that decision, do I and, stay and, put in the time here, or do I go work for another great restaurant or whatever else? And I have no issue with it when you do that. I want to see them, if they leave at that point, you want to see them go do something where one, it's meaningful, but two, where they go, the chefs there are like, wow, this is a good person, this person cares. And so I think, to answer your question, that to me, that the tastings every day are really important, and we stay super disciplined with those. And I say to my team all the time, like, if you're the chef or the sous chef or whoever it is, and everyone puts up a tasting of every dish, at 5 o'clock before service, right? Or 4:30, right? And one, it helps them know their station's set. But two, it's your time that you have to interact with them about, okay, this needs more acid, this needs more sweet, this needs more spice. You have to talk to them about what they're cooking and why. And then we do the same thing with all of really like the batch cooking, because as we
Hmm.
all know, like why the recipe's so much harder to deal with when you start larger batches, right? Okay, well, the corn is not as sweet, or it's a little sweeter, or this or this or this. Well, then when you multiply it by 30, because you're making a larger batch, it's multiplied. That flavor profile is multiplied, right? And so when people are batch cooking, I try to really make sure that as they're working on the techniques and everything else, that like as a chef or a sous chef, you got to know when it's really important to spend that time with them to help them along. So they get the wins, honestly, because you need the wins. You definitely need the
Yeah.
wins, to get them to get to build their confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I always think like, I think it's crazy when people say, "Oh, we don't use recipes."
Yeah,
That said, recipes are super important, but I
absolutely.
think part of the recipe process is identifying what are all the things that might go wrong, even though we dialed this in. Yes, we have the exact amount of salt and sugar, but what if the bricks on this pear is different? What if the water content in this, you
100%.
know, and just knowing those things so that when you're training them, they what to look out for. I think that gets lost a lot in recipes, but talking a little bit about like I'm so curious about your process in the company of R&D. But first off, like how do you get involved with that process, and
Yeah.
then or is it just completely empowered to the team now, or
No, no. So that's a great question. So R&D to me is still like obviously the most exciting part of that will always be till the day I die. I think the most exciting part, right, is it's very rewarding to make the perfect foie gras terrine, right, or something like that, but it's still so much, like something that takes a lot of technique or whatever, but it's still so rewarding to create, and to innovate.
who's Adam Sobel?
So Adam is, Cullen, he is the head of all of R&D. He's a partner of mine in the company and works on all food concepts with me, and creates, does a lot of the creation. So there's two chefs. There's Adam Sobel and Gerald Chen and Gerald runs all of culinary. And so the three of us will spend a lot of time. And then Veronica, my corporate pastry chef, will spend a lot of time on the R&D for a new concept. And so when we say, okay, so like what we just launched.
So you were talking about Orla, by the way. I just
Yeah.
I just pulled up the menu while you were
Yeah.
off.
And so it was really fun process because like Adam, myself, so um just in the studies, like we worked on this for about 3 or 4 years. I also, it's my cookbook, my next cookbook that's coming out. But as we spent more and more time in Egypt and kind of understood like the influence from when Alexander the Great, when Egypt was invaded, and my father is from Alexandria, and my mother was from Cairo, and so a lot of the food that I grew up eating had a lot of Greek influence in it, and it was, it's really funny to see kind of the crossover. And so the point of really the menu was like saying, okay, we took this from all the way from food that I grew up with, some of the staples, and then put some product technique and innovation to them, and create created some really fun dishes to really celebrate some of the storytelling, but some of the Mediterranean flavor, that Eastern Mediterranean and Greek flavors that everyone loves so much and feels great when you eat it. And so, and so it's been really, really fun, like playing with these, these dishes like that. To me, like it's the funnest process. Like fatir, it's this dough that's, this kind of like a laminated dough that's made where you stretch the dough paper thin and you fold ash dough, which is kind of like a Middle Eastern sour cream, and
Mm-hmm.
a
Oh,
sour
that
cream
sounds good.
butter, and it makes this really light dough that I used, my mom used to make like for breakfast, where you pan fry it, and it's really not good for you, but, butter, powdered sugar on it. And so we do it with the ashta and the dough, and it's the most perfect it's the most perfect, base for caviar that you've ever had, right?
Oh man, that sounds so good.
Yeah, and so like, my mom's falafel we're doing with tahina, very classic like salad belly, which is like tomatoes, cucumbers, blah blah blah. But we're doing that. We do it with ahi tuna, or a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful piece
Oh,
of
that's
ahi,
cool.
right? And so being able to be innovative like that. And so what we do is, we'll work on these dishes for a long time individually when we're launching a restaurant. And so we work on the dishes together, the culinary team, for the launch. And then once the restaurant, and then we'll really take, wherever we're at, and we'll, localize it, obviously based on
Mm-hmm.
product, based on seasonality and whatnot. And then the way we work with the chef in the restaurant is, the chef in the restaurant is part of that process. But then really, like, after that, the chef has the freedom to do their own tasting menus, do their own specials. And then as the menus change seasonally after that, then we start to work a lot more with the chef, uh when that the chef really has a good understanding of what the concept of the restaurant is.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And is there any process of collecting feedback, not from the independent of like collecting feedback from the chefs that are doing R&D with you? Do you have any way in which you're sort of intaking customer feedback? When, like, do you launch it as a
Yeah.
special first, and then maybe it goes in the menu after that, and how are you collecting feedback? So
Yeah. So what we did, we originally, so like
got
for,
it.
sorry, for 2 years, we had, for about 3 years, we had the Mina test kitchen. And what the Mina test kitchen was this was pre-COVID. So 3 years pre-COVID, what we did is we took a lot of these concepts that we wanted to grow, and we had a 50-seat restaurant with a very little kitchen, which was kind of intentional, right? Was
Mm-hmm.
And so what we would do is we would sell tickets. We'd do it as a ticketed event. We'd sell tickets. And so let's say we wanted to do this concept. We actually did it. It was called Mediterranean. We did
Mm-hmm.
it. We'd always put
Nice.
like a little faux name to it, right?
Yeah.
So we called it Mediterranean. And so what we'll do is we'll do about 12 dishes. We'll do, um, and they're served family style. And we'll, for the most part, we would um give you like three or four starters, three or four mid fish course, three or four meat course, three or four desserts, whatever it is, right? And then each month we'll run it for 3 months, and each month we would change the menu. And during that time, we'd collect all the data. We would ask guests, because we would actually discount, probably what it would normally be like once it became a restaurant. We
Mm-hmm.
discount it, but we would ask you to fill out, give feedback. We didn't force you to, but everyone did it for the most
Yeah.
part,
Yeah.
honestly. We get feedback, and then the biggest thing is we would watch ticket sales, and
Yeah.
like concepts that I would have thought, like, I'll give you one for example. We had worked on this Indian concept, and we were so excited about it because we thought San Francisco slam dunk, slam dunk. We thought, we were actually already looking for restaurant space. Like
Mm-hmm.
we were so confident. Maybe another word for it, but we
Yeah.
were so confident we were already out looking for the space, right? And the menu was phenomenal. What Raj Parr, who's that Matt,
Uh-huh.
amazing sommelier. It was a lot of his mom's recipes,
Oh
and
wow, that's cool.
and yeah, and he's a chef. He went to culinary school,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a really great chef that he was really close friends with, and did a great menus the whole time, everything else. And I was like, oh man, this is just going to blow up. And it did blow up right at the beginning, but it was amazing. Like the sales kind of
Yeah.
continually, the ticket sales
Was
went, it
it
was,
elevated? Was it like was it more street food or more like sort of an elevated approach than these?
no, it wasn't super elevated at all. It was like, it wasn't street. It's like family food. It's like what you would
Mm-hmm.
eat at the table, right? You know, little dishes, but everything's
Yeah.
shared, like what you would eat at the table. Thought that we had a real home run. And honestly, even myself, I caught myself where I kind of only went like once or twice or three times, and I love the
Yeah.
food, but I kind of I attributed it to like it was kind of like Thanksgiving. I want it once or twice a year, but I don't think I want it every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like, you know, Mediterranean or when we did Little Italy or things like that, I probably went
Yeah.
10 times, you know?
Yeah. The
And
American palate isn't really, it's tough. I mean, we experienced that at, tabla, but like it's when you have that much spice and heat or acid, it's a lot. And if you're not used to it, it's not part of your daily diet.
right.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, that's what I found. And so that was really for us, that was a great way to test concepts. And we ended up with multiple concepts. And so we really have just been opening. We're
Yeah.
just now at the point like Orla was the last of those, and there's one more that we had tested that we still have to open. And so we still, I don't think are haven't really gotten into the market for a new concept. But as far as testing dishes, what we do with that is we do them in the restaurants. And so like chefs will run special, like if they really want to put a dish on the menu, they run it for a minimum of 3 days, because you know how chefs are. Like you might love it the first day, like it the second day, and hate it by the third day, right?
Yeah.
You know, they
Or
run it
it's
for,
impossible to pick up and you
yeah,
didn't realize it.
and we'll get
Um,
back and then look at it against, you know, the dish that you want to take off.
yeah. So, and yeah, I'm looking at your menus and I definitely see like sprinkling of, I'm seeing tamarind and things in there. So you definitely, it's sprinkling in there. But,
Yeah.
um, when is, and I don't know if you can answer this. It's a tough question, but like, when does a dish feel done? You're like, okay, in the books. I don't have to iterate on that anymore.
It's really interesting because some dishes feel done. Sometimes you'll put that last garnish on there and you're like, this is done. And it's done forever. And then there's other dishes that a throughout a year you'll tweak and tweak and tweak, and then they'll get exactly to where you want them, you know. And I
Yep.
don't think that there is a for me, there has never been an exact science for
Yeah.
how, you know, is it done or not. It's like, you know, the dishes that are classics, from tuna tartare to caviar parfait to lobster pot pie, those dishes evolved over a period of time, all three of them, you know,
Yeah.
and they evolved. And when is a dish really done? Honestly, is when it goes on the road and all of a sudden it becomes a classic. And then that's kind of when you can't touch it that much after that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not an easy thing to create those dishes. I am also curious. You think about scale a lot, and I guess to your point, it's a little bit different when you have one-off concepts where you don't have 12 of
Mm,
the same concept, that you have to do that in different places, different altitudes, different equipment. But like, at what point does the scalability of a dish come into play when you're creating the food? Because to sort of wind you up a little bit, obviously, even if it's not a dish that you have to do in 15 different locations, I mean, you have to execute it
yeah,
every day, the same way in a station, and has to, be something you can do with 500 covers or 100 covers.
right.
When does that piece of the puzzle come into the R&D for you?
A lot of it does depend on the kitchen itself, the physical kitchen, the physical layout of the kitchen. And, you know, as crazy as this is, it depends a lot on the consistency of the business, right? So when I look at dishes and I look at, can I put the resources towards a certain dish that I really want to put towards it? It's really the restaurants that have the more consistent business. If like, it doesn't matter to me as much if you're doing 180 covers or 80 covers, but if you're built to do 80 and you're doing 80 every day, Or if you're built to do 180 and you're doing 180 every day, now I can put the resources towards that dish, whether it's, the right. I mean, I've had dishes where it's your whole station, that one
Hmm.
dish. That's all you do is that
Now
dish.
you're talking Bouley. I have nightmares
Yeah.
about
But
15 pans.
yeah, but it worked, right? It worked. That dish, the dish made that statement. It was defined the restaurant. There was a reason that it was
Yeah,
worth putting all that into, right? Um, and to me, it's a science of how do you build a whole menu, not how do you do the one dish, because there might be that dish, but then you also have to think about, well, how do I make this killer salt baked sea bream that actually you do nothing on the pickup besides throw it in the oven, right?
yeah,
To balance it out, right? And so it's all about how you do the whole menu, not just the one dish. I think that's something that in your younger days is hard, like to
yeah,
get, like to understand. And that's where I think the R&D process is really important, is because you have, if you're working as a team and you've got chefs, like that's why I love when people are running specials and stuff like that, because within your own restaurant you'll start to see really cool technique that you didn't know about, right? And that technique might be something that ultimately creates a great dish that is front, we always call it front loaded or back loaded. If it's front loaded and a lot of the mise en place is up front and you still get the wow factor, then you can do something that's heavier back loaded.
yeah, yeah. Don't- I wonder. I'm curious if you think about this because I do a lot, not even just in food, to be honest with you, in any industry, but we are pretty much limited in how innovative we can be
uh,
relative to like how much people will pay for something. To your
uh,
point of
yeah,
resources, right? Like you
yeah,
could probably take that dish and do way more, but
yeah.
you can't, right? Because people won't pay the amount of resources it would take to make that.
Right. I,
Um,
I
do, do you ever think about a restaurant or something one day where you're like, you know what, this is just going to be, I'm going ham. I'm going to do everything exactly the way, and but we're going to charge what we need to charge, and so be it.
I don't know if I am. I do, obviously. We all do, we all want that. But I still would say that overall, I get more satisfaction out of being at a restaurant that has a great feeling to it in the dining room, where like people are really enjoying themselves and people are
Hmm.
really having a great time. And it's not that every single person has to come there to worship the food.
Yeah.
I don't, I, I don't mind the person that has, that will come in and have a perfectly cooked piece of chicken or whatever. And as long as they're having a great time, as long as it's like, you know, if they're mad at the world because they have to eat that piece of chicken, then it's not as much fun. But as long as, like, to me, so much of it is about creating and having, restaurants where, you're like, people go there and they're getting a wow experience and they're wowed by what it's doing. And it's not like, I'm not looking to build the club restaurants. It's not that,
Hmm.
but it's that feeling of like, I feel great. Like, I don't feel like this is a whisper joint. I don't feel like I have to whisper. I don't feel like I had to come here to worship the food. And if I don't know everything about the food, then I feel out of place.
Yep.
I'm
Yeah.
not I'm just not.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's funny too, and it takes a while to understand and admit this, but um, great service can solve a lot of problems. you know, there's a lot of meals that are delicious, but and some are better than others. But if you have, first of all, if you have really bad service, it could ruin everything. But
Right.
when you have incredible service, and that
Yeah.
can solve a lot of the, of the sort of downstream things about the food. And it's tough to admit that, but it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's like, so I've got my Giovanni, right? And my Giovanni is just amazing. He's the dining room, guru. And, why does the dish taste so much better when he talks about it? And he could be anything. Like, he could be wrong about 50% of the ingredients, and it's still going to taste better when he talks to you about it. Because Giovanni just has this magic about how he talks about this dish. Everything else,
Yeah.
you think
Yeah.
you're there. and
Yeah.
and I think it's really true.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And the overall experience, I mean, look, there's just not a place where where all you do is close your eyes and eat the food, and that's all you need. That doesn't exist. It seems like something that you clearly understand as you're building all these concepts. It's everything. It's the whole package together.
Yeah,
Um, so I want to sort of move on a little bit from we were talking about R&D for a while, but you have to have learned a lot. I'm sure you also made a bunch of mistakes, along the way of like how you're leading this team.
sure.
But how do you handle big mistakes that your direct team makes, like leadership folks? Like, do you have any sort of way in which you or any frameworks of like when a big mistake is made, what you do?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that you know, um, I think that you have to, like I said earlier, like you made mistakes on even wrong concept, wrong place, right? And that's a big mistake, and that's a something that you're going to be fighting the whole time that that restaurant is there. And that's probably one of the things that's the hardest to deal with is knowing that you probably should close this restaurant or reconcept it. It's
Mm-hmm.
either a bad location or whatever. And that's a big, that's a big mistake, right? Um, that's going to be a very costly mistake. And it's not just costly financially, it's costly emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
and that emotional investment that you make into a restaurant and when it doesn't work is
Yeah, it's
it's
personal.
it's personal. And and I think in the younger years you'll keep fighting and keep trying to push the rock up the hill, and you finally start to realize that you're neglecting a lot of other things to do that. And I think that that's the balancing act of what am I going to neglect for what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
There's in our business, like in a lot of businesses, but in our business especially, there's only 48 hours in the day, right? So, there's you're already working twice as hard at each hour,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I mean, I don't know I mean, this might just be on the spot, but if you had to think like, what's the biggest mistake you've made, and maybe like what good came from that over the last 30 years? Is there anything that comes to
yeah,
mind?
I think probably the biggest mistake I made was we did a concept in San Francisco, and it was called International Smoke, and I did it with Aisha Curry, and just great, great, great person, and really was a we did it in the test kitchen, and I mean this thing sold out in like 18 minutes, right? It's barbecue from all over the world. Aisha's, kind of her background, ethnicity, everything is the way her style of cooking, everything about it was cool, and it was great collaboration. We built the first one in San Francisco, massive home run, right? Massive home run. Went out and built three more. Went out and signed three
Oh boy.
leases, built three more.
Company owned, so not a management
Owned,
contract.
right? And learned a couple things real quick. Number one, you don't open in Houston right after the Warriors knock the Rockets out of the playoffs.
Ah.
You take sports a lot more serious than they take food. and and so we had about, I don't know, 250 Yelp reviews before we opened about rats running through the dining room, and and we had even opened yet. But number two was, we just grew it way too fast. Like we thought we had something on our hands, and we got careless. Honestly, we
Hmm.
got careless with growing it too fast and not, you know, building that foundation that you got to build. And I think that it really, you know, it was hard. The company has had to fight really hard to rebuild from that. But the reality of it is we learned a tremendous amount because, it is a mistake we don't make now. It's like now, when you build something and you really, like you want to put that time, effort, and into really fully developing the concept and fully, you know, vetting it out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a big one. I mean, how do you think about the difference between you today as a leader and maybe as a chef, but but
Uh-huh.
but more so as a leader versus who you were 10, 20, 30 years ago? Like, what's the biggest difference?
Well, I mean, look, I think that, obviously our industry continues to change, which is great. I think it was important that it did change. I think that a lot of us, grew up seeing, being part of an industry that ran a lot different than it's running today. And I think that, you know, I think that being able to say, that like being able to really look at today and say, okay, how are you to make sure that people are getting that the information that they need the right way? Um, and how do we continue to do that? And how do I let go of, really the control that you kind of feel like you need to have? You feel like you need to be a control freak. And then how do you balance the amount of control that you need to have? Because I think that you can go too far the other way too, where
Hmm.
you become too hands off.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's probably the thing that I've learned the most is like, how do you feel confident enough in what your knowledge to where you can step in at the right times versus I think either step in all the time or don't step in at all. You know?
Yeah.
And I
That's
don't
the
know,
hardest thing, man. It
but
really is. Like, how do you help people feel autonomous, but still the thing that made your business what it is part of you? And how do you make sure that doesn't, it's so hard, right?
well, yeah, because there's a lot of politics behind it. And
Hmm.
so, and you have to, you have to be patient. And I think patience is something that you have to grow into um,
Hmm.
in this business because you're asked so much pressure is put on you that it's hard to find that patience. And of course, like a lot of people, I look back and I wish that I had had more patience earlier, and I keep, and it's still a constant battle. I mean, when, when 100 tickets come in your printer and you're, like, it, it's hard, that you got to keep working on how do you find that
Hmm.
patience through
Hmm.
it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, selfishly, I just want to know, and I apologize, I don't know about Bourbon Steak, but it's
Uh-huh.
opening in my town.
Yeah,
Could you tell me a little about the concept and
absolutely.
when it's planned? Obviously, we don't know exactly
Yeah.
when, but when it's
Yeah.
opening in New York.
Yeah, so end of March, early April is when we'll open, and it's at the Essex House, and we'll be right on that Central Park side. The
Hmm.
Essex,
Great spot.
Apple did the design based out
Oh,
of New
cool.
York. Great designers,
Yeah, great designers.
love them. And Bourbon Steak, as funny as it is, like everybody thinks it's bourbon and steak, but bourbon, the name came. It's 20. I did the first one 20 years ago. And the name came from actually Bourbon Stockyard in Chicago, which was the first stockyard in the United States. And so that's where the name came
That's
from.
funny.
And, we've always been, like early on, it was about, now you see a lot of steakhouses, but when we did it early on, it was really about, product and technique, bringing that to a steakhouse, but still modernizing it, but still keeping what makes a steakhouse feel great, and I really felt like, as I traveled the world at that time, the US, 20 years ago was kind of known for, when people you'd go and they would say, Western on the menus, right? And the menu, that was always the steak part of the menus.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what all those, when you'd see these international menus, that's kind of what we were known for, right? And so it's like, okay, well, how do we up our game? If we're going to be known for that, well, how do we up our game? How do we really, really take kind of classic, really fun plays on classic dishes, whatever it is, how do we up our game with technique? And so started really just experimenting a lot with how to cook steak and how to really have a lot of fun cooking steak. And not that we cook them all this way, but started really started using the sous vide machines, the circulators
Hmm.
underneath big giant butter baths to hold butter temperature and then
Nice.
slow poach in butter and and then go on to a 900-degree wood burning grill. And so kind of reverse cooking as opposed to grilling
Yep.
something, throwing it in the oven where the juice is all leaking out of it. And, the butter doesn't saturate the meat at all, but it just kind of seals it and then slow
Yep.
cook. And so it was a really great, interesting technique that really, as we were tasting, it was like, wow, this is really, really game changing. And so that's kind of what the foundation of it was built around. And then having fun. Like the first thing you get is, when you sit down, your amuse is, duck fat fries, 3 different duck fat fries, 3
Nice.
different things, 3 different sauces. And so it was like break the formality right away. And
Yeah.
then a great, take, what is the perfect twice stuffed potato? What is the perfect broccoli and cheddar cheese souffle? How do you create these side dishes that are like this? How do you create, great fish dishes that feel like they belong in a steakhouse? Then how do you, and never lose the essence of a steakhouse, but really take it and elevate it in a way in which it's, you're going to get the things that you love when you go to a steakhouse, but you're really focusing in on product, technique, and some innovation, and a little bit of showmanship, a little bit of tableside, a little bit of showmanship. This one will be the first one that will be that'll have a little bit more of a supper club feel.
Hmm.
Great lounge, great, probably, live music a few days a week, and that kind of that
Nice.
little bit of that feel to it as well.
That's
And so
cool.
I'm really looking forward to this one. I feel like this is the new wave of bourbon steak.
Yeah. Well, I have a few questions to follow up with that, but first, what do you do with the butter after you poach the
Oh,
the meat?
you strain it. Honestly, like, you'll use it for 2 or 3 days. It gets a lot of flavor, you
Yeah.
know?
Do you use it
Yeah.
like for anything else after that? Can you use it to emulsify things, or is it just kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
done after?
Yeah. You can use it. You can make yourself a nice Wagyu hollandaise if you want.
That sounds awesome. New York's it's such a different beast, and I have to imagine one, you probably did a tour of all the Lugers and the Keens and the
Sure.
but what what were you most concerned about, and what is something that maybe that you had to um change a bit with the concept specifically because of New York?
Well, obviously, I mean, it's extremely competitive, New York. You have amazing restaurants, but you also have really good clientele. You
Hmm.
know, that's kind of the that's that balancing act, right? That you're going to balance, and I feel like I feel good about how long I waited for multiple reasons. I feel good because I have a great customer base that eats in my restaurants everywhere else that live in New York. And so I think that, to me, that is really important. I'm, you know, I, I have so much respect for so many of the chefs in New York because those are the people that I idolized, John George, Danielle, Eric, Repair. I mean, unfortunately, some of the people that we just talked about that passed away. I mean, and so that would be, that's both my concern and my motivation to go to New
Yeah.
York. Is like, I want to, I obviously want to have the respect of them. I've, become close with all of them over the years, but, I want to have a restaurant in the city that they're in, and want to have a restaurant
Yeah.
where they would want to come and eat, and, everything else. And so I think that there's that, and obviously the fear is there, and it's real about, the fact that, even though I cooked in New York and have a lot of ties to New York, that's not where I live. So that also plays into it. Even though, got a great chef. I don't know if you remember, I don't know if you know, Bradley Ogden, who was,
Oh yeah. Wow.
so his son, Brian Ogden, is going to be the chef. And so he's
Oh,
been
that's
in
cool.
many years, and so, and he's going to, it's really going to be about him, and he is going to do an amazing job. He worked for me at Aqua, and, really, really talented chef, very, very knowledgeable, great technique, but very knowledgeable when it comes to product. And I think this concept has product is very important.
Yeah.
Product, technique are very important. So I feel really good about a lot of this, but then it's New York. So
Yeah. Well,
but you bring me back in 9 months, and we'll see. Hopefully I'll.
I think it's the right kind of I think avant-garde concepts are really tough to move to New York. Like if you move like on a linear or something, it's like it doesn't, there's not a lot of like patience for that in New York, or time, by the way. But I think that this concept the approach you have to steakhouse, I think it's going to crush it. Also in that area, there's not a lot of that type of
Yeah.
restaurant around there. So I
Yeah.
think you should crush it.
Excited about it. I really am. I feel like, you know, if we keep it, we don't go overboard with a massive menu. We keep it to where people feel comfortable, and you know that way you can change with all the seasonal product and everything, but people don't feel overwhelmed when they come in. You know, they
Yeah.
feel this is, you know, and it's important to me, I think, as I've seen steakhouses evolve, even though they're called steakhouses, you think of the amount of, you know, great, like you've already got this, you know, this incredible wood burning grill that you've invested so much in this day and age to put a hood in for it, and this Jasper oven and all this. So you can cook, you know, delicious fish that it's simply prepared, and things
Yeah.
of that as well, vegetables.
Yeah. You know, I think the thing with steakhouses is like, they're also kind of celebratory. And that location where you're at, you know, is like, you're going to get all the Midtown, you know, and the finance folks that like do the expense dinners, but then you also have like Upper West Side, Upper East Side that come down.
Mhm.
So I think it's also a great location because there's not most of them, for some reason, are actually like farther downtown. There's a couple up there, but I think it's also a really good location for it. So um, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited
Yeah,
to check it out when we open. I'll bring my wife there. She loves steak. So
perfect.
um, like what do you? We're sort of wrapping up here.
Yep.
Like, what do you think? I don't know if you think about this, but like, you know, MENA Group 10 years from now,
Uh-huh.
what do you see as like the biggest change,
You know,
if anything?
yeah, I mean, I think that as we continue to grow, I think that you'll see more, like Adam's getting a concept within Mina Group that is an Italian concept, Lunara, that he's doing. Gerald is going to has a concept within Mina Group. I want to continue to do more of that. I want to continue to see. That's what I want to see the company become as I, you know, frankly get older. I mean, no other way to really say it, right? I mean, we've seen what's happened of late to people and everything else, and it's really important. I think that, you know, I think that to me that's always been one of the funner things to do, is like let people use the machine to build their, you know, build
Yeah.
themselves. And so if I could see any change, Daniela, who's my chef in San Francisco, she's just amazing. She wants to do a Colombian concept, and she's been pitching me, and I want to see that come to life. She cooks some amazing food, you know.
Yeah, they have so much good. Have you been to like Bogota or that area?
Yeah, and
So much good food there.
so yeah, I mean that would be a dream come true. Like to see the company go forward and have some of these people that have been an intricate part of this company be able to develop some concepts that are theirs.
Yeah, I love that. And obviously now it just seems like you're at a point in your career where the success for you, or the feeling of success, is when you see these other folks that have been with you for so long start to be really, you know, successful on their own as well.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything I didn't ask you
No,
that you think we should talk about, or anything you want to share
I
with
hope you got what you needed out of it, and I really enjoyed it.